Okay, so first of all, so here you are running. What made you decide to throw your hat in the ring for the 109th Assembly seat?
A big deciding factor for me was that Pat Fahey stepped down and the seat was vacant. That was probably my biggest deciding factor. And as I ran against her in the last election, not technically, but I knew that overtaking an incumbent would be hard enough as it was. And incumbents are always hard to overtake. And I actually had no intention of running again. And when I saw that the seat was open, I thought, it's doable now, probably more than it ever will be.
So when was your first shot at the 109?
My first shot was in the last election cycle in 2022. And I wouldn't legitimately call it a shot. I think that would be overstating what it was at that time.
So how'd you do in that election?
So I actually had to step off for personal reasons right after I earned the lines, and I was not able to campaign at all. I didn't lift a finger. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't do any interviews. And come November, I got 10,000 votes, and no one was more shocked than I, because it wasn't my intention to campaign, and I just didn't tell anybody. And people showed up to the election, saw my name on the ballot, and they voted for me because that's how desperate people were for some kind of alternative to the status quo.
You also ran for mayor a while back.
I did. I ran for mayor in 2021. And that was not only a history-making campaign. Even though I lost, I consider that a monumental win. And I will tell you, I've had more Democrats than Republicans tell me they voted for me in that election. I consider that another tremendous win, that people who never thought they could vote for a Republican saw me as an option, not just because it was so bad in Albany, but because I had a campaign that they considered to be one they could get behind and they could proudly talk about amongst their Democrat friends.
Speaking of more Democrats than Republicans, right now, at least up until the primary, there's a plethora of Democrats running for the 109th, the party blessing, if you will, in the primary. Of all those candidates, who do you think would pose the most vigorous challenge, best race? Who would be the most worthy opponent, just in your opinion?
That's a good question, and I have given it a great deal of thought. So a number of them are from the Albany Common Council. I don't consider any of them to be a viable opponent to me because of their poor decision making. And I have all the records as a journalist. I've spent, since I ran for mayor in 2021, creating extensive dossiers on all of them and tracking all of their votes. And they're easy targets in terms of the way that the city is run and how it's come out. So there's that. I don't consider them viable. There are a couple people who are running with broader support. I don't necessarily consider them to be, I don't really consider any of them to be viable opponents to me, but on paper, I would say somebody like Dustin Reedy, who is some kind of high position with Paul Tonko. The only reason I would consider that is because of dirty money coming in from him, and Ginny Farrell from the Albany Common Council is being supported by Pat Fahey. They were riding together at the St. Patrick's Day Parade in some old-fashioned convertible and waving and wearing Irish stuff. And I thought, okay, that was a passive signal that she is supported by Pat Fahey. So those are the two that I would say in terms of having backdoor support. It would be Dustin Reedy, probably through Paul Tonko, and Ginny Farrell.
And speaking of Pat Fahey, she has actually done a lot for the region. She came in from, I believe, the Midwest originally, and cut her teeth on the school board, I guess. And in her career so far, she's had a lot of things she's lobbied for, projects that she's taken under her wing. People look at that and they say, wow, a lot of progress has been made here. A lot of ideas, doors have been opened. There's her, she pushes for that 787 reimagining, and
Sure.
She's getting action and traction and action, whatever you want to call it. She's got this thing now with, Lock 1 and the Central Warehouse, and she's had other, programs that she supported that, you can actually say, okay, here's a politician who's gotten things done.
Okay.
Once she moves up to the Senate and then takes her crusade there, I don't know, but, does what she does there. Okay, now we've got the 109th. So if you were elected and you came in, what would you do differently? Would you stick with some of the programs that she's begun. Livingston Avenue Railroad Bridge is another one that just pops to my head all of a sudden. But what would be your game plan if you were to be elected to that seat?
So I am completely open to examining all that she's worked on up until this point. I really am. And I have been examining what she's worked on. So I would put a pin in that and say I would need a more thorough examination of not just her outward actions, but what I'm looking at is legislation. And so one of the things that I say in my campaign, you'll see in any videos that I do, I say I'm a common sense New Yorker running for assembly in the capital region, representing people like me, making sure our voices are heard at the legislative level. So good for her on whatever she's doing. I see her down at the central warehouse, shaking hands with Jeff Buell and doing all those things. Those are probably great things. But if you take a look at her actual progress and you see the assembly bills that she is sponsoring and co-sponsoring, the central warehouse now becomes a decoy move where that's just PR. What she's actually doing is she's on board with legislation that is making it a public nuisance to discuss anything. That's a First Amendment issue, to discuss anything regarding guns, ammunition, antique guns, gun possession, gun usage. She's on a bill right now. It's very broadly worded that says if you improperly store a firearm of any kind, you can get your license taken away from you in the state of New York. She's on another one regarding domestic violence, where if someone is even accused of domestic violence without proof, they can have, but they do also own a gun, they're going to take that away. So she is an enemy of the Second Amendment. And people don't see that as much. They're seeing her down at the central warehouse. So a full examination of anything I would deem to be common sense, it's on the table for me, 100%. I don't imagine there's very much. I can shake hands at the central warehouse, no problem. I live in Albany. I'd love to see something great happen there. That was something I talked about when I ran for mayor. And so let's take a look at what she's actually doing. And I'd love to bring that to the people, because I didn't even scratch the surface. I could go on all day of the record, her voting record, and the bills that she sponsors and co-sponsors. They're not good.
What about Alicia Purdy? Okay, let's say you get elected. Okay. You come into office. Here's your desk. Here's your new place. What's your agenda? What's your list of things to do?
So I will tell you something that I think would meet with a lot of resistance, but that I would work on for the entirety of my tenure. I think it's a worthy piece of legislation, even though I don't know that the reality is there. And that would be two powerful words every American should be on board with. That is term limits. That's where I'd start. I want to work on ensuring that we cannot set up career politicians, and that no one can set up a kingdom for themselves, or that, for example, Paul Tonko, the only job he's ever had is in politics. That's a problem. Chuck Schumer, the only job he's legitimately ever had is as a politician. Those are issues to me. These people become kings and queens, and they set up little kingdoms and monarchies for themselves. And so that actually is one of the things. I don't know where the term limit would be. I've given that a lot of thought. I've sat in the assembly lots of times over the last bit of this season, and realized it really does move very slowly. And I don't think that a 2-year term limit would be reasonable to get anything done because of committees and the way legislation moves and the debates, etc. But I am a big fan of term limits. That would be a project of mine. And I will say this, the other thing I intend to do in terms of day one is look at where we can move. We're going to do a total 180. That really is, I intend to come in and take a look at everything that is under my purview and say, clearly where we're going is the wrong direction. It's obvious in New York with issues that we have pertaining to legislation and taxation. Right now, the budget is showing that there's $2 billion being given to illegal immigrants and $1 billion being given to our schools. There's our American schools with our children, our future, our generation, our next generation. Our priorities are out of whack. So we're going to move in a new direction. And that actually is the theme of my campaign. It's called The New Direction. We're going to do a 180, and we're going to reverse course on a number of things and get our priorities straight and make sure that we are prioritizing New Yorkers, taxpayers, the people who live here. And the other things can be worked on. I'm not anti-immigrant, but we need to have priorities that show us that we love the American veteran. We love New Yorkers, that we care about our education and our children who are clearly suffering. And our money needs to reflect that. So that's the direction I'm moving in, 180.
Where do you stand politically as far as going into the election? The Republican, conservative, you're on any other lines? What What's the status there?
So I'm running on the Republican line and the conservative line both. And I actually was going to originally make a play through the opportunity to ballot to run as a Democrat. That was my plan. However, the law has changed in the last year that has no longer allowed for that. Nobody knows that. I had to dig into the law, but the language was updated. That's the word they use. The language is updated. That does not allow a citizen of any kind to petition through opportunity to ballot. I was going to jump into the primary as well because I have enough Democrat support that I thought it might be important to them that I represent that way. And I'm running as a common sense New Yorker. In my journalism career, I've tracked politics almost my entire career. And really what unites us is way more than what divides us. And I want to make sure that we're focusing on things that show that we're New Yorkers and there's so many things that we have in common. I was willing to cross a line so that I could meet people where they were at, because at the end of the day, I love New York. I'm a born and raised New Yorker, and standing for that matters. And so many people across politics, they still see themselves as New Yorkers. And I think we can start there.
Anything you'd like to add that I didn't ask you?
Yeah, I will say making sure our voices are heard at the legislative level is it's going to be a major priority in my campaign, because my journalism degree is a great help to me there, in that I understand a lot of the legal language and the way that these bills are written. And as these people, like you said, are parading around and shaking hands and taking pictures, and they're doing green projects and all these things, and we see some outcomes, it's a decoy. What they're really doing is they're shaping our state using legislative power. And I will say, people don't want to show up to vote because they get upset about the presidential election. So at the doors, what I'm saying when I'm petitioning and campaigning is, you have to show up. Even if you don't want to vote for a president, then don't. You have to show up, because there will be legislation on the ballot in November that is going to continue to shape this state, and it needs your voice to be heard. And so I will be very vocal in this campaign, showing people what their lives will be like based on just the paperwork alone. And you want somebody in office that will stand for New York and make sure that paperwork reflects us.
So I would imagine, too, you're open to debate.
100%.